Hello, my name is Patricia Bueno. I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Let's learn together this week's memory verse, which is in Hebrews 11:31. By faith, the prostitute Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. God bless you.
The story of Rahab confronts us right from the start with grace at work in unexpected settings. In a city destined for judgment and in a culture marked by idolatry and immorality, we meet a woman whose life doesn't fit the mold of religious heroes. And that's precisely what makes her story so powerful. It doesn't highlight prior human purity, but God's ability to spot a spark of faith and use it for redemption. Rahab doesn't represent perfection, she represents the response God values, a decision of faith in the midst of decay. As we study her actions, we can't ignore the ethical dimension. Rahab lied to protect the spies. Scripture records her lie without turning it into a timeless model of behavior. Both in the Old and the New Testament, the Bible points to Rahab's faith as exemplary, yet it doesn't exempt the reader from wrestling with the moral weight of the means she employed. This tension teaches us that the biblical narrative often presents human reality with honesty, with its shadows and lights, and that God's grace is not to be confused with blanket approval of every human action. What was decisive in Rahab's life was the choice she made in the face of judgment and the truth about Israel. She declared that the God of Israel was the only God, in heaven above and on the earth below. That confession, spoken in a pagan setting and on the rooftop of her house, a place where pagans worshiped the so-called heavenly gods, reveals a conscious conversion. It wasn't just a platonic or intellectual act. It was a moral decision that set her apart from her culture and placed her into the story of salvation. Welcome, my name is Augusto Palacios, and this is Studying the Lesson. Monday, October 6. Courage in Unexpected Places. Rahab's courage wasn't abstract heroism, but the fruit of a practical faith that showed itself in concrete actions. Hiding the messengers, helping them escape, and risking her own life. Hebrews includes her name among the examples of faith, and James highlights that her faith was proven by her works. These New Testament texts shed light on the essence of the story. Genuine faith doesn't remain just verbal, it saves because it turns into action. Rahab acted according to what she believed, and it was that consistency that God recognized and used. At the same time, it's important to note that the story doesn't idealize her methods. The lie she told to mislead the pursuers appears as a historical fact, but the Bible doesn't celebrate it without nuance. Here we learn a mature lesson. God can work through imperfect instruments without that being a blanket endorsement of all their actions. Rahab's salvation shows God's sovereignty over human history and his ability to turn even flawed decisions into opportunities for grace, without erasing human moral responsibility. Rahab's theological confession, acknowledging Yahweh's sovereignty over heaven and earth, is central. In a world crowded with local deities, her declaration affirms the Lord's universality and anticipates the biblical call for all nations to recognize him. Her act of faith wasn't just pragmatic self-preservation, it was an embrace of the truth that the God of Israel rules history and judges injustice. That put her on the path of the hope offered by divine mercy. From a pastoral perspective, Rahab's life challenges the community of faith in how it welcomes those coming from the margins. She is an example that the church must be a place of restoration, where grace is extended while still guiding toward maturity. Rahab's inclusion in the Messiah's genealogy reminds us that God's redemptive plan weaves through human failure, turning broken stories into testimonies of glory. This openness requires discernment. welcoming the person without glorifying the sin. Her story also personally challenges us. Where do we rule out the possibility that God might act through unlikely people? Rahab pushes us to expand our pastoral and missionary vision. Those society marginalizes or those who have lived in darkness can, by grace, become carriers of faith and service. Our calling is to create spaces where faith can blossom into works that honor God, accompanied by teaching and spiritual support. What's more, Rahab's story reminds us that God's judgment never erases His mercy. Jericho was doomed to fall, yet one family was saved through the faith of a woman. This detail reveals a biblical pattern. Even in the midst of collective condemnation, God extends personal salvation to those who seek Him. In this way, Rahab becomes a foreshadowing of what every believer experiences: salvation in the midst of judgment, thanks to divine grace. The contrast between the condemned city and the woman who was saved is profound. Jericho, with its walls and power, seemed unbeatable, but it couldn't resist God's judgment. Meanwhile, Rahab, vulnerable and marked by her past, found refuge because she chose the true God. This paradox underscores that true security doesn't depend on human structures but on faith placed in the Lord. The story teaches us that faith is the key that opens the door to salvation, even in the midst of total collapse. Finally, Rahab's story is a call to coherence. Public confession of faith must be supported by actions that match it. Her lie doesn't erase the greater reality. She chose the true God and followed Him, and that choice led to life. As a community and as individuals, we are invited to cultivate a faith that dares to be faithful, that risks for the good of others, and that also recognizes the ongoing need for moral and spiritual growth. Don't miss our daily questions on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and X, Twitter. Every day, Sunday through Friday, we post 2 reflections at exactly 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. to strengthen our learning together. Your participation and comments make the difference. We'll be waiting for you.